Well, good morning, everybody. Thank you for joining. I'm sure we'll have, as always, more people join as we roll along. And I'm really excited to have Chad Roffers and Carolyn Wright on the Aspen Property Experience. We're talking auctions, specifically real estate auctions. And I'm going to go way back in time. Chad and I have been working together for many, many years, starting with some auctions that Concierge Auctions got involved with in Aspen almost 20 years ago. And I want to go before that even, Chad, and just say, why did you start an auction business? Why did you co-found this business?
Three reasons. One, I started my early career actually after graduating from the University of Colorado and heading west to San Francisco and Silicon Valley in the early internet days. Was around a number of different auction startups, including eBay. And at the time, there were lots of different ideas and things happening in the world, like change the world, right, with the internet. And nobody had really taken on real estate. So I said, there's something to do there. And then but then quickly learned that if I wanted to try to change or impact change in real estate, I really needed to understand it. So I started to do some development of some of my own kind of high-end properties and experience as a seller how hard it can be to sell expensive properties. And then as part of that experience, said, why don't I just get a broker's license and do that. And so basically spent about 5 years doing that and figuring out what you guys do is really hard. But that experience was really helpful in saying, yeah, there's a spot for auction in the category for lots of reasons. And so that's the, kind of the Reader's Digest of what happened.
Very cool. And I love how all roads to the real estate, being a real estate professional, real estate agent starts with looks pretty easy. And I think I'll just go ahead and get my license and do that on my own. And as many people know, there's a lot of easy parts of the business, but actually putting it together and having making a career out of a successful career is hard. There's a lot to it. What was your first big break as into the auction business? Like, how did that start where you said, yep, I thought there was an opportunity here and now
Yeah.
I validated it?
There's really three things. I would say one, it's either break and or kind of inflection points. So the first was I had the opportunity to become one of the first five Sotheby's International Realty franchisees, and back in 2004. And and as you know, we all share an iconic brand, Sotheby's, and that brand happens to be, its legacy is in the auction business. So it was kind of like, okay, that was really kind of the first big break, if you want to call it that. The second one was, which that was 2004. I spent those 4 years after that. Concierge was founded in 2008, and really learning, understanding the business, really with an eye towards where can this auction opportunity present itself. And most of you remember what happened in 2008, right? The Great Recession, the real estate market really crashed, and so the door opened wide for alternative ways to sell real estate. So I would say that was the second break. And then probably the third one was we got hired by Share to sell a trophy property for us in Hawaii in 2009. And it kind of put us on the map, in a way that, which will be a good topic of fodder for our conversation today, but a non-distressed seller who was choosing to sell in a very different way. I think those were probably three, there's lots of points along the way, but those are probably three big ones.
Cool. And I definitely want to focus in on that last one because I think that will be very helpful and instructive in terms of our market specifically and how auction is no longer, as you and I have talked about, it was really sort of like a bad word or almost like, why would I even consider that? And now it is so mainstream and such a good option. Did you think when you started in 2008, here we are almost 20 years later, that this is what it would look like? Is this the dream or
Uh-huh.
where did it go differently?
One, like all things, is interesting. I listened to a podcast series called Acquired. You probably listened to it. If you don't, like, I highly encourage it. Anybody listening, and these two gentlemen from the West Coast are kind of venture capitalists, or whatever, do deep dives on iconic companies. And I listened to the one about Starbucks, and it was really, if you look at the chart of Starbucks, it was 25 years until they broke like 50 stores. Something, it was like
Yeah.
a long build. And so it's taken way longer than I ever imagined. Interestingly enough, in May of 2008, I attended the Modern Art live auction of Sotheby's, and which arguably is like the pinnacle of the auction world. It's usually the most expensive auction lot, most expensive paintings. It's a packed house. It's an amazing thing. And I was sitting in that room saying, wow, like this is what I'm thinking about here. Like this is what's possible with real estate. That took me, whatever that was, 17 years to actually be selling properties in that room.
Hmm.
So, it's taken a long time. This business is kind of like a snowball. We've grown every year, but it's been methodical kind of growth and reinvention along the way. Now we do $1 billion of property auctions annually and growing, and it's growing at about a 30% clip. So 3 years it'll be 2 billion, and so on and so forth. So, but it took a lot longer than I ever dreamt.
Yeah, that ramp up's long, but that snowball is big now and getting much bigger faster. So it's got to be cool to see that.
Yeah.
Which areas of the world? I mean, you reference, hey, that first auction, Hawaii was a good one, notable one to put on the map. But the reality is now today, I mean, you're all over the world in many, many countries, most states or almost all states. Which areas would you say are your prime markets, or is it just
Yeah.
all over?
So we definitely have prime markets. Now, interestingly enough, the mountain markets, we've got a great property in Jackson Hole going right now, it just started, but the mountain markets have historically been outstanding environments for us. I would say the west of the Mississippi have historically been really our best markets. And I've always tried to understand why, but I think I mean, you guys know this about Aspen, and there's probably, if it's not the best real estate market in the world, it's in the top five, right? What's the definition of best? I don't know, most desirable, highest price points, all those things, right? Um, and but the kind of the caliber of people tends to be pretty high, and the capability of the average person, like they can do whatever they want to do, like when they decide they want to do it, and there tends to be a lot of integrity. And so we were able to really kind of get to, so here's what we're selling, here's the timeline, are you interested or not, and people can get to a decision quickly. And I think that has been, and people I think are maybe more open to alternative ways of doing things in the Western United States. So it's just been a great market. Our number one market is Los Angeles,
Oh,
by far. Texas is a number two, Florida number three. So all, by the way, great feeder markets for Aspen,
I was just gonna
right?
say, I mean, those are our clientele.
Yeah,
So yeah,
yeah.
interesting. What's your biggest challenge right now?
I think it's a good question. I would say that we made a big we made we there was a lot of decisions along the way. One important decision we made at the inception of the business was to be broker friendly. And what that means is really simple. We won't do a deal without a local broker on the team. We're licensed in 49 states as a real estate brokerage. So we, so we take that, so conceptually could not do it without. But the time that I spent in the trenches taught me that, that the value add, forget about just, I don't think it's great bedside manner, so to speak, to like come into town as an outsider and not partner with the brokerage community. I think that's bad form. But number two is I knew that we got better results when we were collaborating with the brokers. So I think that's probably those were two big philosophical like point of view we have, and then just decisions we made. But I would say agent education is probably the number one challenge. When we started the company, a seller did have to write us an upfront check to take their property at auction.
Mhm.
Like I built the company on getting literally $100,000 checks from people to like sell their house, which like as a broker, you think this is nuts, right? Like how could you do that? But we were able to get millions of dollars of checks, and that's how I funded the company. But today we don't do that. Like, but if you polled 1,000 agents, 950 would say, "Oh, like they charge upfront fees. My seller is never going to go for that." Right? So we've got work to do with helping agents, reminding agents that we're their partner. We understand we're not applicable in every situation, but when you need us, you need us. And we should be we should be, I would argue, for a trophy property, the call before the price reduction, certainly the call after the price reduction didn't work.
Mhm.
And I think that's our challenge. And I think the other thing is that helping agents get over the fear of what's my seller going to think when I bring up auction. Because I've sat in thousands of living rooms, these sellers are already thinking it, right? They're already one step ahead of us, so to speak, and being curious about like what do I need to do to sell my property. And so, but then getting agent over the fear of like, am I going to get fired if I bring this up?
Sure. Yeah. Well, I remember the early stages of my working with you with other clients, and I specifically remember one where it was you got to write a $75,000 check, and that's going to cover your marketing. Here's everything we're going to do, and that was hard. That's hard to sell that, to a client of that money's gone if this works or doesn't work. And so it's interesting how that business model's evolved, and I really think the way that you embrace having a listing agent on every transaction is very interesting from a value add model and goes to speak to yes, it's going to cost the seller if they don't already have an agent in place and you come in and say, we're ready to go forward. You need to be able to pay a listing agent and have them be one of the faces for the process, that it's worth it. And it shows where that value is. So, by the way, in terms of educating agents, obviously that's what we're trying to do right now. And depending how the next 15-ish minutes go, you can always take this 30-minute educational video and pump it out there to every agent you want to help them understand. I want to shift a little bit now more into the mechanics and the operations and pull Carolyn in as well. Before I dive into that, a couple of years ago, you sold to Sotheby's International Realty and Sotheby's, the auction house. Talk just a little bit about that and what was the genesis and the benefit, or
Sure.
looking back, how that's played out.
It's been great. I kept a big stake. In fact, I'm the biggest individual stakeholder. So sold a healthy chunk, but not enough that I can tell you I care deeply about the business. And the rationale was really, I think we had reached a point where we wanted to continue to um, propel our platform into the mainstream. And and we had really, it's interesting, Sotheby's is a 260 some odd year old brand that, we all know it's one of the top 10 brands in the world. And so I'm not trying to make the case of Concierge Auctions has 260 years of brand equity, but we had a lot of brand equity. And we were and remain, I mean, we do 85% of the real estate auctions in the world, right? So like we really dominate the category. So people knew who we were, but I think it was like the opportunity. There was still on occasion, well, who the heck are you guys? And like, and since we've done that transaction, like that there's no question of like who we are, who we're backed by. And if there was any remaining question of like, is this a legitimate way to sell a luxury property? Like I would argue that was the final piece of validation that Sotheby's arguably one of the 10 best brands in the world all time, the world's most prestigious auction house, like acquired Concierge to get into the real estate property business, auction business. Like it was a real, so I think that was it. And then I think practically speaking, it's about access to buyers. And this is something, and it's a real perk for Sotheby's International Realty. We work with other brands, but specifically with SIR and SIR agents, one, when we do live auctions for you, they can take place in the Sotheby's Maisons, like the Breuer in New York, which is like amazing. If you haven't been, go. Or the auction I'm going to this weekend in Miami at RM, which we're doing in conjunction with one Sotheby's. So one, exclusive access to those premier venues. And then the second thing, 750,000 clients, right, that are auction buyers. And within that, I mean, we've transacted with all time, which is a pretty impressive, I think, roster. 267 billionaires have bought or sold on our platform. Whatever the world population is of them, 3 to 5,000 depends who you ask, right? So that's meaningful. But then when you add Sotheby's auction house to that list, it's like we've covered you probably have direct access to the vast majority of billionaires in the world.
Sure.
So
Yeah.
that was a big why.
I see the parallel, and I've shared this with our agents many times. Like for me personally, when I went from a smaller local sort of boutique real estate firm and joined Aspen Sotheby's International Realty, it felt all of a sudden like just other doors were opening. The name just you could ride on top of it. You were playing Little League baseball before, now you're starting in the World Series, and I can see how that could just turbocharge your business over the last couple of years, and then obviously into the future. And like you said, you work with all real estate brokerages, but having that platform, especially for our agents that are part of that, I think that's really valuable for sure. Let's talk about how it works. So, just nuts and bolts. I have a client who says, I'm open to having that discussion, Andrew. What's next?
Sure. So, and I would say also, and I think we'll talk today about, one of the things I know got your attention is our new private auction
Mhm.
platform. So I want to talk about that because I think it, um, it, it applies to about 15% of our total business. But I think in a place like Aspen, it, it, it could be half,
Mhm.
right? So we should talk about that. But how it works is super straightforward. Number one, for a seller, speed, 60 days from the day they engage us to a closing. So that's number one thing that sellers really want to gravitate to. The second thing is, kind of like what's the why? The why is whatever reason your property hasn't sold, despite being listed with a great broker. And you could argue that okay, it was mispriced, maybe, although there are a lot of properties in the world that I would argue are incomparable. And so what is the right price? And I would say the why they haven't sold may be more of a function of maybe just bad luck, bad timing. Like the right buyer wasn't there, and then the property got a little stale, and then you're really kind of stuck in limbo.
And that
And
part, sorry to interrupt, but that
yeah,
part that's the mountain resort market, right? Because we're so seasonal and so condensed when people come and view property. And to your point earlier of why do you have success? I think that's a big part of it because you get sellers who, oh, I want to sell. I don't need to sell. As soon as they sign the listing agreement, they're on the market. They are antsy and they want to be sold. And 3 months goes by and the season's gone and it's like, now what? So
yeah,
I totally see that value add from your
yeah.
standpoint.
And we live in this world, consumer world where the property data is pretty transparent and they can see how long something's been for sale. And, we all get the question, what's wrong with it? Why didn't it sell? Right. And, and a legitimate answer is, I don't know, just our timing was bad. That's probably the answer half the time.
Mhm.
Okay. But like a buyer doesn't even buy that. It's like there must be something wrong with it or whatever it is. So seller speed and solving that problem, which is okay, we need to one reestablish urgency with credibility. So we sell in the mountain markets in particular, our sell-through rate is quite high, 8.75 out of every 10 properties we take on. So it means seller property comes on the platform, it's going to be sold in 60 days, 87% of the time. So what that allows us to do is establish credibly, in a credible way, urgency, this house is going to get sold. Okay, so buyers, no longer is this like next summer I'll look. It's now or never. So reestablishing urgency with credibility is really important. And then the third piece is expanding the pool of buyers. And I think that's where, part of the reason why we were able to shift from charging sellers upfront fees, one was a healthy balance sheet, but two, after we had invested about 50 million bucks in building our database, what we figured out was like, you know, the new sellers benefit from the thousands that have gone before them.
Mm-hmm.
And even if they had $1 million budget, they couldn't reach the audience. We can, deliver them with a click of a mouse. And so sellers getting speed of sale. We're reestablishing urgency. We're expanding the pool of buyers, and then we allow our local broker partners to re-engage the market with a fresh message, which is like, nope, like this is game on for this property, and bring and then I would argue price maximization, and that doesn't mean that a seller could say, hey, I want $50 million for my property in Red Mountain, and I'm not selling until I get 50 million bucks. There's sellers who have that mindset. There are other sellers that say, you know what, $42 million right now, given what I also want to be doing with my time or money, is a superior to $50 million in an unknown time frame.
Or
So
unknown you'll ever get the 50 million, forget the time
correct,
frame, right? Yeah, exactly.
correct.
Yep. So nuts and bolts of seller has a listing agreement with a listing agent, and they're offering a co-op commission in pretty much every case, correct, to
Yep.
an agent who brings the buyer. And then what are the additional fees? How does it work if I'm the buyer and I come to the table and say, yeah, I'm interested?
Yep. So listing agreement stays in place. Whatever is being offered to a buyer broker stays in place. And then our agreement is kind of an add-on on top of that. So we sign an agreement with the seller. And our fees derive from the buyer. So on top of, just like you buy a painting at Sotheby's, it's called a buyer's premium. It's on top of what you pay the seller. You pay a buyer's commission, and that covers our fee. So 100% of our fee comes from the buyer, not the seller. And those buyers, they're aware of it. Some factor it into what they're willing to spend. Some don't. Really, candidly, depends how competitive the auction is,
Sure.
and how much, how in demand the property is.
Cool. And I think that's really important for everybody to understand that from a seller standpoint, there's no difference in what your fees or what your costs you're paying here than typically having the property listed, but you get this crazy turbocharged audience and curated group of people looking at your property that Concierge has put together over time. So now the cost really comes to the buyer factoring it in, and like you said, it comes to the auction point. So I want to pull in Carolyn Wright. For those of you who have not met Carolyn, she's Colorado based and spends a lot of time in Aspen. So hopefully you can make her acquaintance the next time she's around. What do you do, Carolyn? Describe your role in this process?
Thank you. Yes. Well, I'm the person that you would engage if your seller says, hey, we're ready to have this conversation, or if you say, hey, I want to introduce this tool to you. It's just a conversation. So I'm the person that you pull in. I will work with you side by side through, from start to finish through the process. But we have an entire team of people that will then be assigned, from a marketing standpoint. We'll have a person totally dedicated to buyers. We'll likely have a person on the ground, boots on the ground with you, helping with showings. And you use the term turbocharge. I think that's a really good way to put it. It's a really intense, but from an exciting standpoint, process where we're just getting a ton of activity on the property. And this is really just creating a multiple offer situation. So I'm the person that's going to, from start to finish, establish, with the seller, what are the terms of this auction? Is this a good fit? We say no 19 times out of 20, probably less in Aspen. But, if it's a good fit, then, this is something that, I would work with you and your seller to put the terms of the auction together, manage their expectations. And then it's my job really to be air traffic control and make sure that we're bringing and delivering on what we're saying we're going to deliver on. Typically 3 to 5 buyers by the time the auction starts, and another 2 to 3 after it opens. and their expectations on what numbers to potentially see too. So that's me. And it is just a conversation. We're seeing a lot of listing agents presenting this at their listing appointment and saying, we probably won't need this, but if we do, I know how to do this. And that way, when you introduce it later, it's not a surprise to them.
And I think that's so key. Thank you, Carolyn, for everybody to understand. This is an opportunity to have a teammate. So I've worked on both sides with this, with the buyers and with the sellers through the auction process with Concierge Auctions. And you all of a sudden it becomes a sprint. So you've gone from you have a listing, and especially in our market, sometimes it's this unknown time frame where you're trying to find buyers, and if things have gone stale or your seller's getting antsy, whatever it is, all of a sudden now you have this 60-day process, as Chad referenced, and Carolyn is your teammate, and you're both sprinting during these 60 days to just get as much activity, as broad exposure as possible. And it's really, really a neat dynamic to be able to have somebody who can lean on for all the auction ins and outs, as well as helping market the property and be another face and person at the property. Let's shift over to this off-market concept, because I'm going to put up the slide that you shared with me, and I want everybody to understand. It's so interesting. When I read the first quip about this last year, the Concierge Auctions was starting a private auction platform, meaning everything I always thought about real estate auctions and Concierge Auctions in particular was, let's get the broadest, most massive marketing global reach as we possibly can. And as you all know, something that's valuable in our market to many of our clients is we really want to stay a little more bespoke, quiet. We want to not be in the MLS. We don't want to be broadcast out there, but we want you to go find us a buyer more quietly. So now we're looking at doing this from a broad auction standpoint, but in a really, really cool way. So Chad, can you share how this came about and why it's so successful already? It seems like it's a huge part of the future.
For sure. And thanks. And that's a great foundation. I think that, the as you guys know, and especially in a place like Aspen, our customers' lives sometimes are, dynamic, complicated, however you want to describe it, right? But there tend to be busy people who have a lot going on in their lives. And there's times when discretion is the most important thing. They still want a result, but maybe they've got something going on, and let's say positively, their company is about to go public, or they're selling their company, or maybe they've got a life change in terms of like a marital situation. There's something going on that is going to generate noise, and that noise sometimes is a distraction, sometimes it's costly, and therefore getting something done in a really a more quiet fashion kind of suits their needs. So it was really, we had just a lot of demand for people recognize, wow, these guys probably have the best database in real estate, meaning concierge. And I want access to that database, but I can't have any noise right now for whatever reason. And I think where we came in, and I would argue, by the way, I think the best way to sell your house is like when you're not for sale and somebody brings you a buyer. Usually that's like as good as it gets in terms of price, right? In my experience. And so I would say to friends, like, that's step one. If somebody gives you an unsolicited offer, like, really really look at it closely.
Borrow
Right?
money when you don't need it because you can't get it when you do need it. Take the offer
Yeah,
when you're not looking for it. Yeah.
totally. So I think that's one. Then two is, okay, like, that hasn't happened. You want to sell your house, interview, 3 top agents, pick the one that you connect with the best, because they're all going to be really good. And list the property probably for whoever gave you the lowest suggested list price. Okay, even if that's not the guy or lady you pick to list. And then if it hasn't sold in, I used to say a year, and now I say 6 months, call me, right? And don't cut the price after you've listed it. Like, that's my general advice to friends and past clients and whatnot about the best practices. I think that there's we've seen an increasing world where, you know, there's desire for off market. I think some of the sellers think perhaps they get better prices off market. Some sellers want the discretion of not just kind of being out there. And I think they recognize the Zillow factor of like days on market are kind of like, I call them UV rays for your skin. They're like not great for you. So, so I think what we saw an opportunity is that seller who wants off market, but they need something, they need it done on a specific, they need or want it done on a specific timeline. And where in the past, like the off market deals, like, well, we can go on MLS, right? Like that's kind of the next move. And and I saw the opportunity to say, we're the step before MLS, not after you've been on MLS and then you cut the price. And so I think that was really the why behind it. And we're really, really, really selective here. This is reserved for just the best properties and the best markets. First of all, if you have to go more than just the city's name to educate the buyer, it's not a candidate. So like Aspen qualifies, Palm Beach qualifies, St. Bart's qualifies, right? Bel Air qualifies. So like, but you get to, I don't know, I pick it. Flathead, Lake Montana. Like it's in the north, it's like, no, you
Right.
lost me already. So it has to be in a desirable place. It truly has to be a property that there is going to be competing interest. And then we, as long as we have those things and we have a committed seller, I mean, literally it's put in front of at least half of the world's billionaires, like personally. So, and the buyers like it too, because, hey, we're coming to you with something that's not generally available to the public. And the other things that we know work great with buyers in our process, but there's a date they have to act. It's happening in 3 weeks. But there's also for the people who are invited into the tent, so to speak, in terms of the private auction, there is that price transparency, which I think is a number one thing that holds back high net worth people, is the fear of overpaying or looking foolish. And our process really validates market value real time for those buyers. So it was really kind of a bring together of all those three factors. And you're right, we could have more demand for this than we even realized existed.
And I think it's so counter. I mean, there's just so much media out there right now, negative press about how it's a disadvantage for sellers to be off market and have off market databases for companies, listing companies. And the reality, you hit it, which is buyers love it. There are so many buyers who that's what they want. They want something that feels like it hasn't been exposed more broadly yet. And I always looked at this from a listing agent standpoint is I just want more arrows in my quiver. So if I'm going to sit down with a client, whether they're existing or potentially a new listing, and I want to go say, sure, we can go in the MLS and we can broadcast you everywhere. Another option is we could be off market and have a more quiet approach and a curated audience that we go after. Or third is we can go the auction route and we can talk about, certainty of timing and a different database and all those kind of things. Now you've added another layer to that auction platform. And so obviously for you, you have that extra arrow in your quiver, but it's the same for our agents for listing a property. And I think that's really valuable. Thank you for that. We're going to wrap up here. I have two quick things. One is we've talked a lot of nuts and bolts, and I just want to spend 1 minute sharing the magic, really the psychology of the auction process, because I've been in the room, Chad, when you had a live auction at the Little Nell in Aspen, and there's 50 people in the room, and there's sort of a hubbub, and you get 2 or 3 or 4 bidders starting to go, and just seeing the dynamic of how that plays out with people on the phone as well. Very cool. I have not been to one of the big events, like you mentioned at Sotheby's Auction House in New York, or that you've had in Hong Kong or other areas around the world. I do want to go. I think that's just got to be electric when you're in a room like that and you've got a series of just marquee properties globally located and going. You mentioned you're in Miami for an event with RM. I think it's important for people to understand that collaboration between Sotheby's International Realty, the auction house, RM, and not just where the cross-pollination is, but also the opportunities of when you have a buyer, like I did one day in Aspen, a brand new client got introduced to me in the morning. They said, "We've got about an hour and a half this afternoon, Andrew. We'd like to go look around the West End, maybe see 3 or 4 properties and give us some windshield education." So we end up going through 3 homes and drove by a half dozen others. And I started to get a sense of what they were looking for, but they felt a little bit let down. I got the sense they actually thought they were going to find a house that day that they were excited about, and they didn't. And as we're heading back to drop them off at the St. Regis, we're driving by a sign for an open house at an auction, a concierge auction property. And I said to them, I said, "We should just duck in, guys. There's an auction here. It's actually happening tonight, 5 p.m. if you want to take a look." And they said, uh, "All right, sure." So we go in. Next thing you know, we're filling out the bidder information form. And about an hour later, I went and picked them back up at the St. Regis, and we sat in that home while the auction started. And they were talking about, right as the auction started, about, "We don't even know if we're going to bid, but we really like the house. This is happening so fast. Maybe we should just, take a break here." Well, about 20 or 30 minutes later, they had won the bid at over $16 million dollars, and the house was theirs. And that all happened in the span of hours because of what you do, Chad and Carolyn, what Concierge Auctions does. And those people still own the property. They're thrilled. There was no buyer remorse. It was really, really cool to be a part of that and see that happen. So I wanted just to share that from a personal standpoint. And then the last question for you, Chad, is what's a day in the life of Chad Roffers look like?
A good day is when I'm doing this. So really, it's spending time in the markets that we want to be in, we are in, and being a resource to you guys. And Carolyn pointed it out. We say no to a lot of deals. I would say we help agents sometimes when we think a price reduction is the right move. We just suggest just do that, right? Sometimes the seller isn't a suitable candidate for our platform, but I think we really want to be a tool for agents, to help them differentiate themselves. Like, hey, I'm knowledgeable about this. This is something that I can bring to you in a proactive way if and when you need it. So I think that's really the key. And that said, we are, effectively in the real estate business, and there's days you get phone calls and a deal's going sideways, and it gets escalated to you, and you've got to come in and try to like fix it. So, we do $1 billion of deals in 33 countries and 40 states. And so, it would be unfair to say, hey, I don't get called in to on occasion fix something. But most days, the best days are this. And I wouldn't be shocked if somebody on this call in 90 days, Carolyn and somebody in this call are doing an auction as a result of this. And it almost always happens because, it's the education is and the relationship building are really important.
Absolutely. Well, I really appreciate both of you. We ran a little longer than I promised, but just because you have so many great things to share, I even have 5 or 6 more topics we'll save for another time. And yes, I'm hopeful that we will see not just one, but several this year opportunities to collaborate with you both on marquee Aspen listings. So thank you both
Thanks,
and have a
everybody.
great day. Appreciate it.
Take care.